should we start this? For the first packet, Ages of Exploration and Nature/Nurture, extend, challenge, or qualify the claim. We agree to qualify this claim, and yeah. So the first piece of
First section.
the first section, it states that China's view on the Golden Rule today is a much more. It affected the way that they would treat the foreigners that they would find, because treating people the way they would not want to be treated, instead of treating them the way that you would want to be treated, actually makes a difference. For example, when the Gama went in and he tried to impose all of his views onto the foreigners, that caused like a lot of foreigners to hate him and like despise him. Whereas the Chinese went in with a very open mind. They were very non-secular. They even Zheng He, he was a Muslim eunuch from China with Confucian beliefs. So he knew not to be secular. He knew to appreciate the others' beliefs and the others' ideas, and he knew what he didn't know. So he wouldn't go preaching the things that were not backed up by evidence.
Yeah. So I'm agreeing with you. So when they found Zheng He and made sure he was the right person because he was Muslim, he knew about other religions, he knew about all the other religions, and they made sure he was the right person because he was knowledgeable. And whereas Da Gama and Xavier also, they're missionaries, right? I mean, Xavier's a missionary, so he only wants to shove his religion onto other people. But that's very different from the Chinese values, where you don't want to impose on others what you don't want imposed on yourself.
Yeah. Going on to number 2, the political values and the benevolence of sage kings. It kind of goes back to the last point, saying you need to be reverent in order to gain someone's respect. You can't make someone respect you. You have to gain their respect. And the sage kings did that by being benevolent, by being reverent, by being open to the people. That's pretty much what Confucius preached the entire time.
Yeah, like transforming virtue. You being a good king would by default make your people better and just have a perfect, or well, not perfect, but a good community, a good country.
And for the political views, Yongle didn't send to conquer. These ships weren't sent to conquer. They were actually just like they were just there to like
just to honor.
Yeah, to show that China was there, and to like
not to like make them part of China.
Yeah, but just to show that like there's this big country all over there. We have a lot of things to give to you. You guys can give stuff to us as well. Whereas Da Gama, I think somewhere said that he went on like he went by the hand of God, and like I think it said somewhere about conquering.
They wanted
they want someone to conquer.
Yeah, and it's like the question talks about greed, and their main reason for going was to get the spices. Da Gama, they heard about the spices from Marco Polo's book and about their rich culture and like silk and everything from China, and they went out searching for just that.
Yeah.
And of course the Christianity, the missionaries, but it shows the difference in like one's greedy, like they just want to impose their religion onto others and they want stuff for themselves. Whereas the Chinese, they didn't want to conquer.
Yeah, and going back to that, it was like China was we'll give you things if you give us things, and they were kind of like they were equal gifts, like. Whereas when Da Gama went in, he would take like spices, pepper, and everything.
Yeah.
And all he would give was like, oh, did that stop recording? honestly.
Okay.
And all he gave were like clocks and like
And
useless
jars
materials.
of honey and
Yeah.
like things that they would already have. Nothing like there
Things that
wasn't
weren't
anything.
significant.
Yeah, like gold or silver. He didn't have any of that.
Yeah.
And that's what the kings and emperors pointed out, that he is not getting anything worth like a value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's covering the basic over the non-essential.
Yeah.
pretty much.
Basically, the whole Chinese belief that businessmen are not.
We're the lowest
Yeah,
class.
we're the lowest.
Yeah. Do you think that since they were separated, that we know greed came into play, but what about violence?
I think, yeah, that makes a huge difference in their culture, because China was secluded and they didn't really, other than the nomads, they didn't have any enemies
Yeah.
to fight. And whereas Europe has like this whole, they have had so many wars, and
Yeah.
because
So
they're
they're
all
used
trying
to
to
the
conquer
violence.
each other. Yeah, they're used to the violence. They think everybody's like that, and just that's where like greed and
So,
violence comes into play.
Yeah, because like China, they were like secluded from the rest of the world, so they didn't really have any other problems besides the nomads and the Mongols.
Yeah.
They just went to explore, whereas the Europeans, they went to take and
Yeah, to take control and conquer,
Yeah.
because that's basically their nature, to want to conquer, because they've seen so much of land where they're from. Whereas China, just at first they just knew about themselves, but then they were curious, so they just wanted to know about the other places.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also the idea like that since they'd imposed their views, and when people wouldn't listen, it's not like, oh, that's fine. It's like if you don't listen, it's practically death for you.
Yeah. So that's like the whole tribute system.
Yeah.
If you didn't pay tribute, you just didn't get backed up. You didn't get the security
Yeah.
from the Chinese. That's it. You weren't. If you were disrespectful, that was a totally different thing. But if you just politely declined,
It's-
there was no issue.
Yeah. Like China, they brought soldiers just to intimidate.
Yeah, just to show off. Well, not show off, but like to inform the people of who they're dealing with.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So,
Yeah, I think we're done with this.
okay.
Challenge the claim that Xavier did not actually respond to Japanese criticisms of Christianity, because the Japanese, they were spoken of as as people of reason. They wouldn't just bite into it that easily. They needed evidence. Like when asked about God, they'd just ask why this, why that, and
Yeah.
the Christians, they weren't really prepared. They kept like having
Yeah.
to change their idea and
Yeah,
their perception.
they didn't expect, because they're in their own country. Everybody just kind of went with it because
Yeah.
of
The government just
the
like,
government. Yeah.
this is our religion.
But the Japanese, this is something totally new. They're not gonna just accept it, and they do question it. They just like everything about God and how merciful He is or isn't in this case, and they didn't accept it. And even if they went close to accepting it, it would cause them sorrow, and just they didn't like it in general.
Yeah, the only reason I believe that that the Japanese would believe the Westerners on the God is not because the Christians were able to provide evidence that God exists, but it was actually because the Christians had so much, like they excelled in science and education. They were able to tell the people about the sun, about the stars, and about the geocentric universe.
Geocentric, yeah.
So that's why, since if the Japanese were to believe them, it would only be based on
That.
other knowledge, in which, oh, if they know so much about this, that means that God must be real because they know about God.
Yeah,
Which-
because it says that they didn't know about, like, they didn't have knowledge about astronomy and stuff.
Yeah. So
And so, yeah, so,
when they brought it in, it was
Yeah.
like, yeah.
okay. Yeah.
And in the creator of the world, the Japanese, like prior to it, they did not believe that the natural world had any origin outside of itself. So they didn't think of a supernatural being.
Yeah,
They-
they were more practical.
Yeah, they were like an atheist kind of culture, and so for like these Westerners just to come in and like just tell you this is what happened, this is how you came to be, this is what's gonna happen after you die. It's
hard to accept.
yeah, it's hard to accept. So they kept questioning, and it made the Jesuits like they just had to keep thinking, and they had to stay on the ball.
Yeah, and it's kind of obvious. Like you're not gonna just accept something totally out of the way. So it's they just questioned how how they're gonna go to hell if they don't why they're gonna go to hell if they don't believe in this, and whether they questioned whether if they would go to hell even if they didn't before they even knew about Christianity, whether they would go to hell if they didn't know about it, or what about their ancestors. And the Jesuits weren't really prepared for such questions.
Yeah, they just thought that they would just believe it like all other Westerners.
Like everybody else.
Yeah. I think one of the hardest things for the Japanese to swallow was the idea of death. Like the
heaven and hell kind of thing.
Yeah, they were scared of like, oh, but my ancestors, they did not know of this religion, so it would be practically unfair if they were in hell.
Yeah.
So it's not their fault. It's just they didn't know. And if God was here the entire time, that means they must be in hell.
Sorry, and that's another part. They didn't accept it as easily, and therefore, because it caused them so much sorrow, and it says that they didn't cease to grieve over the misfortune of their relatives.
Yeah.
So
even though they gave an answer, the Japanese still couldn't get over the fact.
Yeah.
So creator God, merciful God.
And this kind of goes back to the whole golden rule of the West. They came back and they wanted to. Their goal was to penetrate even the emperor himself with their religion. So that's kind of what if he doesn't want it? And it's kind of silly that their whole golden rule.
Yeah, and when they were speaking of China, they knew that China was a big empire.
Yeah.
But they still believed that they could make the Chinese believe, even though they didn't have such a successful time with the Japanese. They still believed that they could make an immense empire, enjoying profound peace. They could change their religion.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's weird because in this paragraph he's just talking about how China's so happy and how they're so peaceful. But so why would they want to change it?
Exactly.
You know?
I don't see how
they just want to.
Where that thought even came from. Like he knows that they're at so much peace and they understand what they're doing. They're successful. I don't see how or why he would want to disrupt that.
Yeah.
And I guess it's because he suspected that they were Jews and Muslims and not Christians. Therefore, they're wrong. Maybe.
Yeah, kind of like when the Gama went through.
Yeah.
And said that they wanted to get rid of all the Islamic people.
He made that demand and it was denied, so he kind of attacked them.
Yeah.
The last part is Christianity's
God was more merciful than Japanese Buddhism's God. We would like to challenge that.
Challenge that too, because they questioned how merciful he was, because he created people good, but their own. How could a good, merciful God allow his people to go bad?
Yeah.
And just go to hell and not be able to come back?
Yeah. So even though that Xavier says that the Christian God was more merciful, the Japanese didn't believe it. It doesn't mean everyone has to believe their view.
He couldn't even prove it that well. I mean, other than it's your own fault. There's nothing else that could prove that the Christianity's God is more merciful.
Yeah. They even say that they succeeded in solving all of their questions, but the Japanese, they still seemed angry, and they
didn't want it.
Yeah, and they were only able to baptize 500 people at Yamaguchi.
Yeah.
So strange.
Yeah. And the Japanese didn't accept it, first of all. And they knew that the Japanese culture was derived from China. So I don't see why he would want to even go to China if the Japanese didn't like it. You know, it's yeah.
I think we're done.
Yeah. So this one is Ricci in China. We're gonna challenge Ricci's claim that Chinese culture and people always believe in God, and yeah. So we don't believe that Chinese culture believed in God. Ricci knew about he learned about the Confucian. He read the Confucian classics, and he learned about the Chinese culture. But Confucianism didn't believe in a divine God, divine ruler, and like heaven and hell. So I don't see how that's even true.
Like the view on the afterlife, we have to establish that Tian and God, they weren't really the same people. They weren't the same thing.
Yeah.
They didn't stand for the same things. Like God didn't create everyone. They believe that Tian didn't create everyone, whereas God did. And so for the afterlife, you're not gonna go see Tian. Instead, you're
gonna be with the ancestors.
Well, yeah, but it depended on like which philosophy you believed in.
Yeah.
Like Buddhism, you had reincarnation, and then for the others, you like they weren't really sure what happened after death, were they?
Yeah. So like it kind of varied. Like Buddhists had their own thing, Taoists had their own thing, Confucians had their own thing, but none of them were that there was a divine God like Christianity.
Yeah.
So Ricci was totally different. He was totally off by a lot. I don't see how he could have claimed that, because they haven't always believed in a God, and
like even at one point they got rid of Tian.
Yeah, they did that, and so there's totally like no divine anything.
Yeah. Like
a ruler, and I don't see how Christianity is simply the most perfect manifestation of Chinese faith, because Chinese faith doesn't have a God. It doesn't have. I mean, of all the religions in Chinese faith, there isn't a main God. Like Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, none of them have a divine God. So it just doesn't make sense at all.
And like one of the biggest differences from Christianity with one of Chinese religions would be I find Buddhism, because they believe that you have another chance in life. You don't go to an eternal place such as heaven or hell. You can get reincarnated into another being. And what's ironic is that when Savior died in China, he was buried in a Buddhist temple. So it's just ironic that like he spent so much time in China trying to figure them out.
Yeah,
and he couldn't. He thought he did, but I don't think
he clearly didn't.
Yeah.
I don't even see where he could have gotten that idea from, because Tian isn't even the divine God. I don't see how he could have derived, like, even however much you mutate it, it's not gonna turn out to be that. Yeah. And
like God had a play in the afterlife, whereas Tian doesn't.
Yeah, and there's for like Buddhism, you just keep going and reincarnating until you reach enlightenment or nirvana. And so it's not really a heaven and hell kind of thing like Christianity.
Yeah, it's like just the yin and yang. It's always like a flow. It's always rolling.
So Christianity can't be the most perfect manifestation of Chinese faith.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So yeah. And qualify Kangxi's claim that the Christian missionaries are like bystanders before one's doors, who discuss the affairs of one's household insides. They cannot command respect and are often troublemakers. And this isn't only shown in this packet, but like throughout all the packets we've received, that these people who go in trying to impose their views, they're troublemakers. They go in and they want to change things, but they have to realize that not all the people want change. Some people are happy with what they have. They can't impose their views onto everyone. And if people don't accept it, doesn't mean you have to use force. If they don't accept it, it should be fine.
Just accept it.
Yeah, accept them not accepting it.
Yeah, and that's basically most of this is just going back to the golden rule of the West. You know,
Yeah,
how
it's like
they're just not. They should see like how life is without Christianity. See, they don't see that it's successful and it's going well. They're just blind towards that and just think that their religion is the best.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's like the idea that all these different missionaries from different religious institutes who came in preaching their different ideas, and that just didn't make sense to Kangxi, because he believed, if you believe in the same God, aren't you all one under him? Aren't you all the same people? Aren't you all the same?
Exactly.
Like, why would you need different groups? Why? It didn't make sense to him. He believed that everyone was equal. He still had that viewpoint.
Yeah, like it's right for him to believe that, because all the religions in China there weren't really like different sects underneath. Like
Yeah.
there weren't sections and they weren't divided. They
Yeah,
were like
they're, like,
Confucians,
Yeah,
Taoists, and Buddhists. So
they weren't really like split up beyond that. It was just they got
Yeah.
the three major well, there were more religions in China, but like
yeah, I mean just
yeah,
the main ones.
they just got them, and they weren't split up into like Catholics and everything.
Yeah.
They're just there. Kangxi's claim that Westerners do not seem to be able to comprehend the ethics of China. They are not versed in the Chinese classics, and their opinions are often laughable. Their beliefs resemble the kind of jumbled discourse you find among minor Buddhist and Taoist priests. Ban their activity and there will be no trouble. Yes, that's true. Because if you read the Confucian classics, if you go actually like want to understand China, you'll understand that they're open to everyone's beliefs, but it doesn't mean that they'll believe what you believe.
Yeah, and they don't expect you to go and start believing what they believe. It's like, okay, if you want to, it's
Yeah.
here for you.
You can live among each
Yeah.
other. You don't have to all be the same, because you can believe in whatever religion you want.
Yeah.
And that's kind of going back to the reason why he didn't like these these Christian beliefs was because the religious value to know what you don't know. And when the Westerners came in and they were so sure with their idea that God is real and that God is the savior for all of us, he just didn't buy it. He didn't feel like, okay, where's your evidence? Where's your proof? It's like the Japanese. It's just
It was really similar to the Japanese. I mean, you come in, you say that you're totally correct, but you don't have like solid proof for it. Like, okay, everybody believes it in Europe. Like almost everybody believes it there. But why? Like,
yeah.
you need solid evidence if you're gonna impose it onto somebody.
Yeah, and then like when the Catholics, they created the rules, like if there were a Chinese Catholic, they wouldn't be able to practice the idea, like they wouldn't be able to practice of ancestors. The Confucian rituals. You wouldn't be able to pray to your ancestors, and
That was kind of silly.
yeah, like the big difference is in China you could have been a Confucian Taoist.
Yeah, you could mix it all up and still.
What time did I say to finish?
Soon.
I don't remember.
Soon means.
Now?
I'm asking you.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Teenagers.
You said 40 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't remember what time from.
We started.
How much time is on your video right now?
But like
We
made 4.
Cutting it off.
Oh.
Finish or go back to class?
Yeah, finish. But you know what? Talk about like real people. It's like, just get to it,
Alright,
Anyway.
back to what I was saying.
Yeah.
The Chinese, they believe that you could believe in whatever you want, so they could jumble up Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, and you'd be fine. Whereas the Catholics, they created these laws, and like if you're Chinese Catholic, you can't practice ancestral belief.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just come into somebody else's country and impose your own religion and expect them to just suddenly change and forget their own basis and just magically go into become Catholic or Christian.
And then the emperor basically like started getting mad at them. So then the Catholics changed their views back to being like, oh, you can practice your ancestral belief. There is a Tian and the Shangti. But then that wasn't enough. So
yeah, they kept changing it. They adapted it so that the Chinese would accept it, but it never got.
It never caught on.
Yeah.
I think we're done.
Yeah, we're gonna go.